Welcome to the Flex Diet Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mike T. Nelson. On this podcast, we talk about all things to increase muscle performance, improve body composition, do all of it in a flexible framework without destroying your health. Today on the podcast, got my buddy, Dr. Scott Cher. We're talking all about all the wonderful stuff he's doing, primarily more on the side of methylene blue, mitochondrial adaptations, health, and a real wide range of stuff. I've gotten a lot of questions about methylene blue, and I've been looking at the research a fair amount over the last 3 to 4 years, but Dr. Scott has done many deep dives into it. He is a board-certified internal medicine physician, leading expert in hyperbaric oxygen therapy, mitochondrial health, and cutting-edge performance optimization. The founder of Integrative HBOT, where he trains clinicians around the world in the use of hyperbaric therapy, recovery, longevity, and complex medical conditions. He's also the chief medical officer over at Transcriptions, a company that's focused on offering novel, rapidly acting nootropic formulations and some really super interesting stuff. Like I said, today we're talking about methylene blue, which he has a big background in. And he officially completed his medical training at Temple University School of Medicine and Thomas Jefferson University Hospital. So right now, he continues to educate clinicians, lots of public speaking, consulting, podcast appearances, and everything else. So I think I really enjoy the conversation today. Like I said, it's primarily on the compound methylene blue, since I feel like there's a lot of misinformation online. It appears to be either something horrible you should never ingest, or the thing that's going to save you from all of the world's ills. And like most things, it's probably somewhere in between. So we talked with Dr. Scott about that. If you want more stuff from me, you can check out my link down below to get onto the daily newsletter that has all the great information completely free. So sign up there below. Make sure to check out all of Dr. Scott's wonderful stuff he's got going on. I'll put a link also to Transcriptions, which I've been using now for a little while, and it's been great. Got some of my private one-on-one clients testing some stuff out also, so you can check them out at the link below. FYI, it is an affiliate link, so just assume I make some dinero off of that. But the main reason I wanted to have Dr. Scott Cher on here is to talk about some of those formulations, specifically methylene blue, and do more of a deep dive for everyone here. So without further ado, enjoy this podcast with Dr. Scott Cher. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Scott. How are you?
It's good to be here, Mike. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. The topic today is one that it's interesting how I find topics come in waves. I first heard of methylene blue, it's probably maybe 8 or 10 years ago. And the first time I heard about it, I was like, what? You know, whenever you do probably what everyone else does, you Googled it. I'm like, fishbowl cleaner? What the hell? I'm not taking fishbowl cleaner. This is the stupidest idea I've ever heard of in my life.
Sounds
and
like
then you kind of dismiss it.
You don't take fish tank cleaner, everybody. Listen,
yes,
please
no,
don't.
we're not recommending that.
Yeah, please don't.
Whatsoever.
Yeah.
And then I started to hear more about it. Probably started maybe around 5 years ago. And then through, Transcriptions was the first company I saw that had it out as a product, and, following your stuff, Dr. Ted for a while. And we were saying off air, Dr. Ted's one of those guys where I hear him talk and I'm like, I don't know, that sounds kind of crazy. And then I'm off doing my own research on a whole bunch of stuff. And then a couple months later come back and I'm like, son of a bitch, that guy was right again,
I was like, welcome to my world, working with him for this many years. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So how did you get involved in methylene blue, and what, we'll kind of just start there. How was your journey into it? Because I'm always interested in how other people find out about things and how it shows up on their radar.
Yeah. So, for me, I guess like the backstory, I'm an internal medicine physician. I grew up pretty out of the box as the son of a chiropractor. I did conventional medical training though, with the sort of high-minded idea of trying to create an integrative practice once I finished all my training. And then, multiple to sort of, chapters later, I was involved in hyperbaric oxygen therapy for many years. I created an integrative practice around that. I met Dr. Ted in 2017. His name is Dr. Ted Atracoso. He's this amazing practitioner, physician. He's multiple boarded, just kind of like the polymath, brilliant kind of guy. And he had a framework that he actually created called Health Optimization Medicine in Practice, which we abbreviate Home Hope. And that's homehope.org is the website. It's a nonprofit organization that trains practitioners on a foundational framework that looks to optimize health rather than treat disease, take things out of a sort of an organ base, more to the cellular base, more from an energy metabolism side of things, and optimal ranges. So like optimizing you not to be normal for your age, but to be optimal between 21 and 30 years of age for hormones and gut and networks of nutrients and et cetera. So we got involved. I got involved with Dr. Ted back in that time frame. As we were kind of developing the nonprofit and the training for practitioners, you don't have to be licensed, by the way. You can be a non-licensed provider and get training in this as well.
Cool.
Yes,
That's
you
awesome.
could be, you can be an MD, you can be a DC, you could be a health coach, you could be a fitness instructor. It doesn't matter because, as you know now, Mike, things have gotten so much more democratized as far as what you can do, even personally, go get your own labs done or whatever. But having a good framework for all this was really the key, and understanding what those markers look like. And so out of that nonprofit and understanding the framework, when you're optimizing somebody's health, it doesn't happen overnight. This is something that happens over months to years, depending on where they are and where they want to go. And of course, the path never ends. It's just, a path, right? And so as a result of that nonprofit, understanding the framework, understanding the path, well, we know there's a lot of roadblocks along the way. And one of those roadblocks significantly is obviously going to be energy metabolism, detoxification, inflammation. And this is where Dr. Ted he's always like this. I mean, since AI has come around in the last several years, it's been crazy to see what this guy can do. But even before this, he was always scouring papers, scouring research and literature. And as you were probably looking, like you said, 10 years ago, when you first started learning about methylene blue, he was learning about it then as well, seeing that was being studied for things like Parkinson's and traumatic brain injury and stroke. And then, of course, the bodybuilding fitness world is always doing things faster and before everybody else because they're always looking for that leg up. But until we came out with a company in 2020, you'd have to find it from like an industrial supplier or a chemical manufacturer. And that's almost always going to be contaminated with heavy metals like lead, mercury, cadmium, and arsenic. But Ted was looking at some papers also for people that were sort of healthy aging and having methylene blue given to them, and then having some MRI scans of their brain afterwards and looking at function of like attention, memory, learning, and skill acquisition. And so we basically decided as a result of that, we wanted to use methylene blue in some of our products. And we were very early here. This is February 2020. We launched the company, Transcriptions, and we were the first commercial provider of methylene blue outside of going to a chemistry lab and buying it directly, which is still sketchy, by the way. I wouldn't recommend I would not, because that is where, as you said, fish tank cleaner. So actually it doesn't clean the fish tank the fish tank itself actually cleans the fish. It's an antiseptic, it's an antimicrobial. And that's why you use it in fish tank cleaner, to actually treat the fish itself. And so it's got a long storied history, which we can talk about. But in essence, that's how we came to understand that, wow, if it's working in the mitochondria, because that's what the research was showing. And like the statistics are crazy, Mike, like 94% of US adults are metabolically unhealthy, which corresponds to mitochondrial dysfunction. Then we knew that we had something here that could potentially be very, very effective, even if it was a very blue dye, not from the earth, like lots of controversy as we now know. But there's, over the last 6 years now, we've just seen significant power using this particular compound.
And I think that's what it seems like. If people find something that's, my air quotes, natural, they're more accepting of it, even though there's all sorts of natural stuff that can kill you.
Of course.
But
yeah.
Things that are industrial or chemicals, and then you see the color and it's like ridiculously bright blue, and then you do the history, you're like, oh, it's a dye for all sorts of other things. Like it has all the sort of hallmarks, at least in the bodybuilding, fitness, natural world. Probably not bodybuilding, they don't seem to care so much about that.
They don't care about natural as much in the bodybuilding.
Natural, they don't really care. But everyone else is kind of like, I don't know, and you're telling me this is a good thing and it's turning my mouth blue. I don't know about you weird people.
Yeah. I mean, just to reflect on that, like I grew up the son of a chiropractor, okay? And he was like a militant against the man, the machine of conventional medicine for many years when he first started practicing. But over the years, he realized, as many people that are listening really do understand, like we live in modern society. We live with bad food, bad lighting, bad air, bad people, and we don't live ancestrally where we have beautiful sunlight and beautiful food and water. And so sometimes we need synthetic things to help us, and in addition, so like a good example, if you're taking insulin right now as a diabetic, that is synthetic. It's
Oh
not
yeah.
something that, that's been made from the ground. Yes, it's a natural chemical, but it's also been made, it's been synthesized, right? But if you have an infection and you have cellulitis on your leg, like a skin infection, and you don't get antibiotics for that, you can die, right? But you would have died 200 years ago, or even 100 years ago, really, if you didn't have antibiotics to help you. And then not everything and everything that's natural, as you said, is good for us either, Mike. You just said, like, in my experience, I remember being in medical school and watching people die of liver failure because they foraged for the wrong mushrooms, right?
Oh
And
yeah.
so you have to be super careful what you're foraging for out there. So I think it's more of a conversation regarding just kind of where we are as a society, where we are from a metabolically healthy perspective, which is not very good. And then I think then the conversation is like, okay, so now that we're living in this very synthetic world, we want to do as many things naturally as we can. And my father, for example, as I was mentioning, he sends people to the hospital. He uses a ton of methylene blue in clinical practice now for mitochondrial dysfunction, inflammation, long COVID, and other sort of autoimmune issues and things, and sees fantastic benefit. So he's kind of come around over the years to understand that there is just a time and a place for everything. We just have to be, acknowledging that that's the case, I think.
And it seems like mitochondria are all the rage now, which I have a whole issue. It's for good reason, and I like the discussion, but I think a lot of times people miss the big picture on what is actually most helpful for that. But which would be, shocker, aerobic training and training first.
Of course.
Again,
Yeah.
not to say there's not things that could be beneficial for it. So in terms of methylene blue, how is it actually acting on the mitochondria? What is it doing? Because I think there's a lot of controversy there, and I know the research, at least in my interpretation, is rather clear, but it can be a little bit fuzzy on some of the edges. So if someone is consuming methylene blue, mitochondria wise, like, what is it really doing there?
So what we think, we have a pretty good understanding, as you said, Mike, is like there's some really good research that's been done. This compound has been around since the 1870s, 1870,
it's an old compound.
right? So it's not 1970s, 1870s, right? And so its initial chapter was an antimicrobial, because higher doses of it, about 1 milligram per kilogram, up to 2 milligrams per kilogram, usually is really your good antimicrobial dose. That's somewhere between 50 to 100 milligrams, depending on your ideal body weight. But what we're really talking about here with mitochondrial perspective is actually focused on much lower doses of this. And in what's happening there is that they figured out in like the 1950s and 60s that if you put methylene blue on a cell and put it looking under a microscope, you would see that the methylene blue would concentrate in the mitochondria of the cell. Okay. And when I was in chemistry class in college at UCLA, this is one of the things we did in chemistry class that I remember, is using methylene blue as a stain to look at the mitochondria specifically. We now know what's happening in there, which is that methylene blue has a very interesting role called a redox cycler, meaning that it has the capacity to both help with electron flow and electron donation to the electron transport chain in the mitochondria. And at the same time, it can work directly and indirectly as an antioxidant. So the quick and dirty of this is that in our electron transport chain, the part of our mitochondria, we have 4 protein complexes. We need to eat fat and carbohydrates so that we can flip off electrons from our food and bring them to this electron transport chain. They're carried by NADH and FADH, NAD and FAD. NAD is all the rage, and that's another question we can talk about. But what happens is that these NADH and FADH carriers flip electrons to your electron transport chain. The problem is that there are so many of us out there that have dysfunctional complexes, don't have the capacity to actually do this effectively. As we get older, our NAD supply does go down. That is true. But there are so many toxins and stresses to our mitochondria, to these protein complexes, that make it extremely difficult for us to make energy. I mean, one of the most common things that we see is, for example, is glyphosate exposure. So glyphosate is, from Roundup, it is a chemical that destroys complex 1 in the mitochondria. So if you don't have the capacity to make energy from complex 1, you're relegated to complex 2, which is okay, but you don't have as much capacity to make as much energy, right? And so, and then if you have, there's other things that can do this. There's toxins in their environment. There's medications that people take on a regular basis. There's certainly other aspects that can cause mitochondrial dysfunction, which I'll talk about in a minute. But the complexes themselves, if they're not working very well, and you can't donate electrons effectively to complex 1 and complex 2, the whole system starts breaking down. So what methylene blue can do in those cases actually is it can actually compensate for that by actually donating electrons further down the chain of protein complexes to help you bypass those dysfunctional areas. And then what I like to think about it here is like, well, it buys you time. It buys you time to start understanding what's happening and why it's happening, and then remediating that. So optimizing your vitamins, your minerals, your nutrients, your detoxification pathways. Like that's all really, really important, but it takes time to do that. It's not going to happen immediately, where we know that so the prime example of this, Mike, is actually cyanide poisoning.
Mm-hmm.
Cyanide destroys complex 4 in the mitochondria. And if complex 4 doesn't work, there's nothing that's going to work there.
Yeah, you're hosed.
You're hosed. Exactly. Exactly. That's a great Minnesotan way of saying it, right?
Yeah.
And so what would happen if you didn't have methylene blue around is that you would die, right? But if you have methylene blue around, what it can do is that it's this sort of like these ninja moves that it does by allowing you to bind oxygen to the methylene blue, creating hydrogen peroxide, throwing hydrogen peroxide across the mitochondrial membrane, allowing that to be the electron sink for your electrons going through complex 1, 2, and 3. So and then you have the capacity to still make some energy through some of the rotors that are still working, even if complex 4 isn't working. So I know that's kind of like deep biochemistry, but
no, it's good.
Yeah, but the real key there is that it has it's an antidote because it buys you time, right? Certainly, if you maintain cyanide exposure, you're going to die regardless. But if you had a cyanide exposure, you're still maintaining some energy metabolism, even if you don't have your complex 4 working, which is like pretty amazing, right? So on that side of the on that side of the coin, which is energy production and compensating for energy and for the complexes not working very well, methylene blue is fantastic. And in addition to that, it also works as an antioxidant, so that even if you have a lot of oxidative stress, if you have a lot of decreased capacity to neutralize the oxidative stress of making energy, because when we make energy, which is ATP, we also make water, carbon dioxide, and reactive oxygen species. Those ROS are okay. They're good. We need them in small amounts. This is what exercise is good for in others if you have the capacity to have an antioxidant response. But if you don't, then the system gets really like filled up with garbage, like your city that's not collecting waste anymore. You see the garbage just kind of pile up, and it starts, smelling and everything else, right? And so what methylene blue can mostly do here is work directly as an antioxidant. So that's why it has the capacity, which is very unusual, to do both, which very few compounds that I'm aware of are able to do.
So one of my little pet theories, and I can't find any data to support this, is that, and it's mostly anecdotal, I've had some people who I'd say are hyper responders to methylene blue, meaning like, they're like, oh my God, this was like the greatest thing you ever did. This is so amazing. I feel so much better. And I've had other people who are like, meh, I don't know. I can't really notice any difference. And my hypothesis is that the hyper responders typically, I would say, are the people who have worse metabolic health. That, like exactly what you said, it's kind of pinch hitting for some stuff in the mitochondria, and it is temporarily making them better and able to do things, which is great. Mm-hmm. But also in my head, that's also what you said too, that this is a temporary thing. So I'm viewing this as, okay, this might be a way to help with energy, help with, ROS, all these other things. But we need to also continue to dig deeper and figure out, okay, what's really going on, that this is like I don't want to say a Band-Aid, but it's kind of a way, like you said, to buy time and not the fix of, well, just stay on methylene blue the rest of your life. Like it's also an indicator and a bridge to, okay, we're going to take the detour for a while, but eventually we want to get back to taking the main highway. And this is just buying us time to figure it out, and energy and sort of currency that we can play with to actually be able to do the things we need to do.
Yeah, I really appreciate your perspective there and your framing. The way I would just kind of add here is that,
yeah, please,
absolutely, it's like if you have 300 pounds to lose, right? As soon as you start exercising, you're going to start shedding weight compared to somebody that has the 5 or 10 pounds to lose at the end of their process of trying to get to their ideal body weight. So there's absolutely a correlation in my clinical practice where the people that have the most requirements and support needed, they definitely see a benefit at much lower doses of methylene blue for sure, right? Absolutely, that's the case. What I would also just say though, like in addition, like there's an edge case, which is an endurance and athletics, which is kind of interesting
That was
because
my next question.
yeah, yeah, because so I can go there if you
Yeah,
want
please.
in a minute, but before I go there, maybe I'm just going to round out the other aspect of is that I do agree with you that my goal with my patients always is to get them on support that helps them now, so that we can get them across the next several markers on their development of optimizing their health, right? So if you give them a little more energy, then they can start walking. If you give them a little more focus and a little bit of brain power, then they can stop yelling at their kids and to have a better relationship with their spouse. And they start taking their supplements and they start changing their diet. And, so it's like we talk about exercise being like your
Domino
cornerstone.
effect.
Yeah, like exercise being a cornerstone habit. I always like that idea. Like you start exercising, then you want to eat better, you want to sleep better, all those things. Methylene Blue feels like a cornerstone compound for me, for a lot of my patients, because it becomes that thing that we can sort of add in. Your other aspect of it, which was, is it a Band-Aid per se? Like, I get this question all the time. Is it something where if I stop taking methylene blue, am I going to go back to the way I felt before? And I often tell people, well, it depends on what else you're doing, right? If you're just taking methylene blue and you stop it, like these people always ask, like, are you going to get dependent on it, right? And I'm like, no, you're not dependent on it. But if you're not also looking at how you're going to optimize your physiology, otherwise, you might get some benefit that maintains after you stop methylene blue, but it's not going to be likely where you're going to want to be. There is some evidence that methylene blue can improve complex 4 function and also enhance the number of complex 4 proteins on its own. Actually, Francisco Gonzalez Lima, who's a researcher down at University of Texas, Austin, has done some of this work in Alzheimer's models in animals and mice. So it's, human studies haven't been done. There's also some evidence it does help with mitochondrial biogenesis, along with sort of optimizing endogenous nitric oxides production as well. So I think there's some evidence there, but it's not what I hang my hat on, with patients. I mean, I'm always saying, this is what I'm starting with you now, so that we can help you along your road and along your path to health optimization. And then hopefully over the long term, you need it much less, and you're only using it when you need more help, like you have more mitochondrial stress, like you're going on an airplane, or you're doing, you have a long day at work, where you're going to really have a lot of brain power, or you're going to be doing, some of the endurance and exercise work, which we can talk about too.
Yeah. So do you think it is an ergogenic, like something that would increase exercise performance? And if so, mechanistically, is that doing something at the mitochondria? And these are more, we'll say, generally healthy people, or is it helping with the ROS production? Because we know, especially in high volume endurance training, for example, has been well documented. You just have a lot of more, free radicals that are spun off, which again, isn't necessarily bad. A lot of those serve as signaling to trigger downstream adaptations, but you don't want a ton of them running around and causing a muck everywhere either.
Yes, I've been using methylene blue now for a number of years in athletes, and I've been using it kind of on both sides of the coin, which is on the performance side and on the recovery side, right? Because of just what you just described here, you need to create enough hermetic stress on the system to be able to shift the epigenetics and shift, mitochondrial biogenesis and all the things that you mentioned, so that you build back. But oftentimes what people are doing is that they're not doing the recovery, right? They're not getting enough of that relaxation recovery period, and then that oxidative stress just builds up and builds up and builds up and builds up. So I think that's a no-brainer for me on the methylene blue side, because I've seen it with athletes that are overtraining. If I give them just lower doses of methylene blue 2 or 3 hours after they finish their training, their HRV goes up when they sleep, their sleep scores improve overall. They're recovered faster because they're getting more of that energy and detox capacity. So it's a very common thing for me to use it that way. I use it in combination with other modalities, like mild hyperbaric therapy, for example, is a nice combination. So mild hyperbarics combined with methylene blue, maybe some red light exposure, because red light and methylene blue also synergize. But red light around the 680 nanometer wavelength actually donates photonic energy, photonic electrons, really, to complex 4 specifically. And then obviously methylene blue can do the same. So there's a very synergistic effect. And Francisco Gonzalez Lima actually has a paper on this in looking at Alzheimer's models. So I think that's almost a no-brainer for me. Like if I have people that are training, especially if they're doing after their races, after their actual,
so big competition, super high volume, super high intensity.
That's a no-brainer for me. Like that's why, we talk about, don't use ice after, training, but use ice after doing something like that, right? Because that you're trying to you're trying to clamp down on that inflammation because it's just too much for the system, right? So I think for that, I think it's pretty well understood that you want to get recovery stuff going as soon as possible. But when it comes down to, the endurance side of things, there was an interesting study that was done on animals, on dogs, that looked at lactate threshold for animals using methylene blue. And they found that they reached their lactate threshold later if they had methylene blue around. And this is because of what you're describing here, which is one of the things you just described, which is it's mopping up ROS, right? But it's also maintaining aerobic capacity for longer because it has the capacity to actually be the electron sink if needed. So if there's not as much oxygen around, methylene blue can become that electron sink as well. And so basically the whole complex chain of electrons and through the proteins continues to work because you have methylene blue around. And so what I've seen, at least in endurance athletes, and I've worked with a number of cyclists now, I have one guy he's a very good cyclist. He's been on a number of the big teams. He won't tell everybody else that he's using methylene blue because he's noticed that his aerobic output does go up significantly when he's training with it. I work with a guy that did the Leadville ultramarathon 100 miler here in Colorado where I live. And we were giving him 32 milligrams of methylene blue every 4 hours. And he cut his time off by 3 hours from his year before.
Was that acutely like before the event, or was that as part of his training leading up to it?
We did it as part of his training to get him used to it. But not every day, not when he wasn't doing huge amounts. Like we wanted to make sure that he got his aerobic capacity up. But during his final leg of training and also during his race, he did the 32 milligrams every 4 hours. And that's the deal, right? So it's a bit of a balance when it comes to endurance because even there's some interest. I have a friend of mine that does a lot of work in the anaerobic training side. And what he's noticed with methylene blue is that what he feels, and he's very in tune, we haven't done studies on this, which is that he feels that he can recover in between sets at a higher heart rate compared to what he was able to do before. After going down to a lower heart rate before we could do another set, where he felt like his sympathetic reserve was high enough that he could, maintain his output on another set of exercise. So that's an interesting one. I think that has to do with what we're talking about here as well. I haven't quite understood the entire mechanisms behind that quite yet.
It's probably a higher aerobic output, right? So he's shifting to a higher percentage of that is aerobic, which is allowing him to probably feel not as taxed per se, I guess I would say maybe.
Right. I think that's what it is, right? I think that's what he's feeling is that it almost becomes like he can do both at the same time on some level, right? Which is unusual. Usually you have to do aerobic or anaerobic training, but he thinks that he can actually do a little bit of both because he can maintain a higher heart rate while he's actually doing anaerobic work and still have the same output on the anaerobic side that he would have if he would have had to have a lower heart rate to have the same output in a typical scenario, right? So with all of this, though, I just want to be clear. I don't think somebody should be taking methylene blue every day when they're training. I think it's something that should be used, periodically, right? And as a way to maximize output, to maximize capacity. I just did an interview a couple of days ago with a guy that does a lot of jujitsu training, and he does a lot of power wattage training on a bike as well. And he noticed when he goes and he uses methylene blue, that's when he actually can reach his peak. He can get to his peak using methylene blue, like 30 or 40, was it milliwatts? I can't remember the exact unit, but
it could be watts actually, depending on what he's doing. Most likely,
probably watts. Probably watts actually.
Yeah.
Probably watts. He said he can get 20 or 30 watts higher using methylene blue when he's got it on board. So I think for for really kind of getting to the edge of your capacity, I think methylene blue is very interesting here. And then also I think it's very interesting as something to use for competitions and things like that. Because I think it can be, helpful in those capacities too.
And so for the ergogenic performance, it appears to be that is an acute effect, meaning if you obviously want to test this and everything else, but you could use it on the day of the event or the day of your testing, and you would see a benefit on that day, right? Because we know some of their compounds like beta-alanine, creatine monohydrate, they are beneficial, but they're stored in the muscles, so it takes a while for us to saturate the muscle, where other things like caffeine, 30 to 60 minutes, you have an acute effect. So methylene blue appears to be more on the acute effect spectrum for performance enhancement, correct?
Yeah. So the half-life of methylene blue orally is about 4 to 6 hours.
Mm.
The peak effect is going to be around 2 hours or so.
Oh, okay.
And so it's certainly an acute effect. And that's how I typically would use it. Sometimes what I'll do is dose it twice a day in people, twice a day, depending on what they're using it for. Sometimes I'll do it every 4 hours, like the guy doing the ultra marathon here in Colorado. That's the Leadville race for those that are following at home.
Which is a long event.
It's a long event. 100 miles is a long time. Yeah. So that's a very different kind of stress on the body compared to most people. But I do use it in people that are, have chronic complex medical illness, that have, brain fog and concentration problems and pain and things like that. And they find that they have a benefit. They take it 7 o'clock in the morning, but then they start waning that effect around 12 or 1 until we take it another dose. Then I typically don't recommend taking it too close to bedtime, because what also is important to know about methylene blue is that it does have what's called a monoamine oxidase inhibition effect, which means it increases norepinephrine and serotonin, and at higher levels, like around 100 milligrams or so or above of methylene blue, which is, again, not common to use in most situations, it also have a dopaminergic effect as well. It's dose dependent. So lower doses will have a small amount of serotonergic and norepinephrine effect, and then the higher doses you get more. So some people will feel more wakeful and have a harder time falling asleep if they take it too close to bed. But most people don't have an issue. It's not a stimulant like, drinking caffeine or having nicotine or something like that. You don't get a crash or like a come down or anything like that. It's really nice. Like if you're pretty well optimized, Mike, and you take methylene blue, what you should feel is just more of like an elevation, just a rise in your capacity. It shouldn't be like, holy crap, this is amazing. Like that's not typically what people feel. Some people do have that effect, rarely, that are pretty optimized. Otherwise, it's just like, wow, I feel just like I can go for longer. My energy's higher and sustained and not jittery, not stimulated kind of feel. For me, oftentimes it's like, I look back at the day and I go, oh, I didn't get tired in the middle of the day. I didn't, yell at my kids when they came home, when they asked me a question when I was on a podcast or something, right? Like you have more capacity, mentally. And as you know, Mike, I think, although I had this argument with one lady, Gabrielle Lyons, about where the most mitochondria are per cell, but the most mitochondria per cell in reserve, definitely the musculoskeletal tissue, right? Because you have to have it all prepared in case you have to run away from the proverbial saber-toothed tiger deal. But the most mitochondria per cell are actually in our reproductive organs. So eggs have the most, and then
that
sperm,
makes sense. Yeah,
sperm's not far behind. The brain is next, though, right? So people that mostly have mitochondrial dysfunction, we know fertility rates are going, kaput, and we see this across the board. In addition, though, mental health disorders, complaints of brain fog and energy. This is like the number one complaint that most people will have when they go to the doctor, is they don't have enough energy anymore. Energy and anxiety, actually, those are the two major ones. Talking to my colleagues around the world, number one complaints, they go, depending on the time of year and what's going on in the world, it's either not enough energy or anxious, right? We even know anxiety itself, depression, these can be related to mitochondrial dysfunction and not related, to a biochemical issue. We now
Chris
know
Palmer's got a whole book on that. That's super fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, the metabolic perspective of this is huge, right? People on ketogenic diets and seeing their depression go away. We certainly know that depression is not a serotonin deficiency. I mean, when I was in medical school, that's what I learned, is that you were giving people antidepressants with SSRIs because they were low in serotonin, and that's why they were depressed. But no, they're not actually. There's no lower levels of serotonin in people with depression and people that don't have depression. Their mitochondria, and that's the big piece here, and also their GABA levels. Interesting. So gamma aminobutyric acid, our primary inhibitory neurotransmitter in the brain, that is really where there's more correlations with depression. But in the end, it's really a mitochondrial issue, is what it comes down to for the most part.
Yeah, that's why for years I got so much crap for this. I was like, okay, so mechanistically, SSRIs within hours are actually affecting serotonin.
Yep.
Like that was pretty well shown. That's been shown for long ass time. And I'm like, okay, then how come all the clients I referred out to psychiatrists were stating, well, you may not feel anything. We got to wait at least, 3 to 8 weeks. And I'm like, well, hold on a sec. If you're telling me that serotonin is the effect, this drug is clearly changing serotonin levels within hours, then you're telling me you got to wait like 3 weeks to see if there's any, like, it just never made any darn sense to me at all whatsoever.
I mean, mechanistically, it doesn't, right? Like if it was a serotonin effect, then you would see it immediately, right? And,
Right.
I mean, you were way before your time, Mike. And I mean, I remember when I was my first year out of residency, internal medicine residency, and I was working in a primary care office in Baltimore at the time. And the doctor that I was working with, he's been in practice for, 30 years. Anxiety, SSRIs. Depression, SSRIs. Fatigue, SSRIs. Like
Yep.
everybody got them, right? It was just what you did. This is in 2000, what was it, 10, 11? So this is not that long ago, right? And so it's just amazing to me. I mean, there's been a lot of really great stuff that's come out with regarding to serotonin as well, and how it has an effect on the mitochondria over time as well. And it's not a good one, by the way, right? Having higher levels of serotonin. So it's a very interesting marker, or, obviously neurotransmitter on its own right. But certainly the way I think about this, and I know many people now do, is like, okay, there's a mitochondrial stress that's going on here. And the question is why? Could it be something that was sort of top down or bottom up? Meaning, was it top down, like you had a severe traumatic childhood, or you had a severe death in the family, or something that, like a car accident or something like that? Like that's more like a top down kind of approach, right? And you also have like a bottom up approach, which is a toxin in your environment, right? An infection, a medication that you took that, caused significant stress on the mitochondria itself. Either way, you end up in this place where the mitochondria aren't functioning very well. And it's very important, though, to understand you have to approach it from a mitochondrial, regeneration perspective, how you're going to do that short term and long term. This is where, again, methylene blue can be in the short term, especially. But then also understanding that sympathetic aspect of it is very important too. In the sense of, like, if you've had this outside influence that's caused the mitochondrial function, that needs to be addressed in some way. Knowing also, which is also a very interesting point, is that you can still get in that sympathetic place, that sympathetic fight or flight space, even without an outside influence. It could just because your mitochondria are under so much stress that they flip into something called the cell danger response, which is now you're not making enough energy at all, but you're putting out signals to try to make more. And you get stressed because of that. And then it becomes this whole thing that I call the sympathetic spiral of doom, which is, not a fun place to be.
Yeah. And those people, in my experience, historically report very ADHD-like symptoms, even if they don't have a formal diagnosis, because they are, if you think about what happens if you just crank up your sympathetics, like you literally have a shorter attention span, you become hypervigilant, you're like constantly scanning for threats, like you present everything that ADHD would present. And so I sometimes think there's a little bit of confusion there, not to say there's not overlap, there's 100% overlap. But if I do like their heart rate variability, resting heart rate, respiratory rate, if all those are wacky, I'm like, okay, I'm not your psychiatrist, but let's work on these things. Fast majority of the time they get better. If all those are great and your aerobic base is amazing, okay, yeah, now I'm definitely going to refer you out, because I don't think it's more on the physiology side. There might be something else, going on, like you mentioned.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned ADHD, because I think, Boomer Anderson's the CEO of Transcriptions. I know he interviewed you many years ago for his podcast. Yeah, we've talked about this. We've talked about, how it's such an important question, which is, can you focus because you can't focus because you have ADHD? Maybe. Or is there something else going on there that's really causing something more physiologically, right? And I mean, part of this is the external environment. We're just being slammed with phones and notifications.
Oh, for sure.
Like that. And I think that's a big part of it. But I like that you mentioned that, because I also mentioned a couple of other things for people to watch out for, that where they're kind of in this sympathetic spiral and they may not realize it. So if you're feeling like you're tired, but you're wired, you can't get to bed at night. If you feel like your mood is kind of up and down throughout the day and you're not really able to stabilize it, that's also a potential indicator. A big one on the physical side, Mike, and I'm sure you could probably relate and reflect on this. I'd be interested in your opinion. Is on the recovery side. Like if you're doing things and you realize that you're just not recovering as well, it's taking you 3 or 4 days to recover from exercise, or if you go on an airplane and you can't recover for 3 or 4 days or longer because you have more mitochondrial stress, you have very little sympathetic reserve. You're not going to see the recovery on the other side of it. I'm sure you see that. I mean, that's probably why you're measuring some of those baseline metrics that you mentioned too.
Yeah, usually they see that recovery is severely impaired. And sometimes if they're not aware of it, I'll do horrible things to them, like have them do really high output intensity stuff, like on a a rower or an echo bike where I'm getting an actual watt output from it, the equipment that's easy to access. Might even have them do it back to back or within 48 hours. And the second session is just absolute crap. And then I explained to them that, okay, it's not all in your head. Like,
Right.
you physically can't repeat a hard and heavy task. Not to say you need to do this all the time, not to say you should train that way. And then you match that with, high respiratory rate, poor HRV. They're generally kind of, twitchy. And usually if I measure their aerobic base is crap. Like their VO2 max tends to be on the lower side almost all of the time, right? Because now we're back to mitochondria and the ability of your aerobic system to actually generate energy to, when we've pushed you off homeostasis, it takes energy to get you back to homeostasis. And a lot of these people are just living so far off homeostasis and it's taking them forever to get back to where they were. And then the last thing is just whatever I can do to get them to downregulate. If it's, sauna, breathing. I have a shift wave device. I'm a big fan of that, which is amazing.
Yeah, that's a cool one. Yeah.
Anything just to get them to kind of just chill out. And a lot of times it's even just to have them get the sensation of it.
Yes.
Like
that
I've done,
is key. Yeah.
I think you've talked about this too, is that I don't think Wim Hof breathing or supraventricular methods are good in that instance at all, because that's pushing them sympathetic.
Absolutely.
But what I will do is I may have them do just 2 or 3 rounds and then just get as quiet as possible, because now they've got that big comparison. And in that quiet space, I just want you to hang out now. I don't want you to do this every day, but I want you to get the sensation of what it feels like to be quiet. And I have found that comparison, if you slam those together, they then go, oh, that's what kind of quiet feels like. Oh, that's what I'm trying to get. Oh, I get it.
Yeah. So from a sympathetic perspective, that's really interesting, because I say the same thing oftentimes, which is that what I'm trying to do to break that sympathetic spiral is to give them the experience of being in parasympathetic for
100%.
once. Right.
Yes.
But it's interesting when you mentioned there, so you're basically overdriving them with a couple rounds of Wim Hof to get them slightly more sympathetic, but in a place where their mind gets quiet, to give them the experience of what it would be like if they were in a parasympathetic state.
Yep. And then I keep pulling back the sympathetic portion of it.
That's super interesting. Yeah.
If you're also hyperventilating, you don't even have to worry about breathing per se for a while.
Yeah.
So for a lot of people, that's the first time they've ever felt just quiet.
Yeah. So I love that. I haven't thought of that specifically, because I think what I typically think about, well, if you're downregulating somebody's nervous system, it can be very scary for them too, because you're not used to having that tension, that clamp down feeling go down. So what I've used over the years is actually supplementation using GABAergic things. Like we have something at Transcriptions, a couple of things that work on downregulating using, leveraging the GABA system. So GABA, again, for those that are following at home, is your primary brakes of your brain. It's a neurotransmitter that calms things down. And when you're stressed all the time and sympathetic all the time, you deplete GABA depletions associated with anxiety, with depression, as I mentioned earlier, and also mental health disorders, insomnia, all the things. And so, but if you can leverage the GABA system, you can give people the experience of what it feels like to calm down the nervous system. Then they know where there is, and then they can do the breath work, they can do the yoga, they can do the sauna, they can do the mindfulness training and things like that. But there's a danger here, when you're bringing them down, that it can be very scary, because systems feel like they're shutting down for a little while until you can get them through that and then get them that feeling. The big thing for that I always try to remind my patients as well as people that are listening is that GABA itself as a supplement should not work for you. GABA is too big of a molecule to get across into the brain. If you take GABA on its own and it works for you, this is often because your brain barrier is leaking things
the old GABA test for the blood-brain barrier.
You know this. So it's almost diagnostic, right? So I've had patients over the years where they're taking GABA supplements and they're feeling quite relaxed. And then we optimize their blood-brain barrier by typically optimizing their gut. It's typically a leaky gut causing systemic inflammation that, the collateral here is the blood-brain barrier. And then as a result, they get, this is not just, the classic is reactivation of Lyme, of mold, of EBV, of these other things. This is because the blood-brain barrier has gotten, a big hit. Like this happened a lot after COVID. I'm sure you've seen this too, Mike, where people were fine. They got COVID and then all of a sudden they have these infections and this brain problem. And like, this is because of that blood-brain barrier. So what we did at Transcriptions was we created some compounds or use some compounds that can get across no problem, and then actually they're very good for the receptor because they don't deplete GABA along the way. Like things like alcohol and sleep drugs and like benzodiazepines, they all bind to the GABA receptor, but the problem is that they bind to a separate site to where GABA would bind. It's called an allosteric site, and they enhance the affinity for GABA to bind, but they also deplete GABA as a result of that very, very quickly. So you get tolerance, you get withdrawal, you get dependence. That's why, these drugs aren't great at all, especially, of course, alcohol. The other ones are bad too. They can be used if they need to be. But what we did is we created some compounds or some products that have compounds together that bind to these allosteric sites, like kava or like CBD or CBG or magnolia bark are some of the ideas. And then we have something that binds directly to where GABA would bind. We have something called nicotinyl GABA, which is a vitamin B3 attached that gets across no problem into the brain. And we also have something called agarine, which is from a psychedelic mushroom called the Amanita muscaria.
Amanita muscaria.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating mushroom.
Fascinating. Yeah. And so Christmas lore and Alice in Wonderland and Mario Brothers, you want to dry the mushroom. The mushroom itself is toxic because there's another compound in there called ibotenic acid. Ibotenic acid breaks down into agarine, which is a much more, it's not psychedelic at low doses. And it's also a long acting binding to where GABA would bind. So what I do in practice is I give people something like our Trocom, for example, that will give them the experience without making them feel too tired, because you don't want to make somebody so tired either, because that's not going to make them feel good either. And then they get the experience of, okay, this is what it feels like to be back in parasympathetic mode. And then, you and I can, talk about how those, like you talked about, like meditation, calming breath work, sauna, whatever it might be. That's the next layer. And then like the next layer after that is like, well, why the hell are you so stressed anyway? Right? What's going on in your life that caused you to be in this sort of spiral? And that could be like, myriad type reasons, right? As we know, that needs to be addressed over the long term for sure. But if you're not addressing that parasympathetic aspect now, very unlikely you're going to see them heal over the long term. I always talk about this, and I'm sure you have too, Mike, which is that I can't give you enough supplements to support you if your sympathetic nervous system is clamped down. It's like, I hate when conventional doctors say that when you take supplements, it's just like having expensive urine, but it kind of is if you're sympathetically dominant and clamped down, because no matter whatever I give you for the most part, unless it's calming down your nervous system, is going to help you heal from, mitochondrial dysfunction or toxic exposure or whatever.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, if you're highly sympathetic, you've got, blood flow is diverted away from the gut, and you've got, I've worked with some people where their digestive issues were primarily that they're just on the sympathetic side, like 24/7.
Right.
They're spinning 2, 3, sometimes 3.5 millimoles of lactate at rest, like sitting there talking to me.
Crazy.
And it's just like, let's just fix that first. And not all the time, but many times, like their gut stuff clears up. Oh, you're not diverting blood flow from your gut like all of the time. Oh, no wonder your gut gets better. It doesn't always work, but it's amazing how often just those things have these huge systemic effects overall too.
Yeah, a cool sequencing that I've realized over the last 6 months is sequencing the capacity in the mitochondria before downregulating the nervous system.
Yes,
and
I would agree.
This has been very interesting to me because I've been doing this with Methylene Blue, actually, where I give very, very small doses of it for a couple weeks before we start downregulating the nervous system. Because sometimes, as you said, if you downregulate the nervous system too quickly and there's not enough support there, you've been on the stress mode for a long time. You've been pumping out cortisol, norepinephrine, and epinephrine. Your mitochondria are in this sort of highly ROS, the ROS state where they have much more ROS and much less antioxidant capacity. And so if you suddenly, turn off all of those hormones and those neurotransmitters, there can be this sort of like this lag effect where people can feel pretty terrible. So if you can sequence it where you start supporting mitochondria first before you start working on the anxiety and the stress component, like that's where I've seen really amazing benefits over the last 6 months as I've been starting to do this more.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'll do. Like I kind of think of, if your aerobic base is really poor, I want to target that first. Let's give you as many micronutrients, up your nutrition, probably up your calories, more protein, essential fatty acids, potentially methylene blue, other things that may help with mitochondria, get you on a solid aerobic training program, give your body the capacity to allow you to get back to baseline. And then we'll kind of, sprinkle in a few things, to help with that. But in the back of my head, I'm not expecting these huge changes until they start having that capacity, because as you know, then it becomes easier to do the thing you're requesting them to do. A lot of times I think as trainers and coaches, it's easy to yell at the client to do something that we know should be effective, but if they can't do it and they don't have the capacity to do it, like, to me, that's not really that effective coaching. The thing you're telling them isn't necessarily wrong. It's just not effective at that particular time, but maybe very effective in 4 to 6 months. So,
yeah. And it's a beautiful segue into how I think about this, which is that we talked about in the beginning, we have a nonprofit organization that's training practitioners in health optimization medicine, health optimization practice. To delineate that, health optimization medicine is if you're licensed a provider, health optimization practice is if you're a non-licensed provider. But that kind of process takes time, as you said, right? You're optimizing vitamins, minerals, nutrients, and cofactors. We're using the science called metabolomics, which is this really cool science of kind of melding the real-time workings of the cell with environmental exposures and looking at everything in real time there, what's happening now, what just happened. And so you can use that data to optimize, micronutrients, fatty acids, looking at gut metabolites. You can look at hormones as well in this capacity. And doing all those things is really the sustainable way to maintain somebody over the long term. And that's where we're trying to get everybody, which is where they're at a stable base and they're more resilient and they have the more capacity and they can use things as needed when they have additional stress. But for the most part, they shouldn't need that stuff, right? They shouldn't need, their methylene blue on a regular basis. They shouldn't need something like, Trocom or like anything to calm down their nervous system orally. They should be able to do this with a little bit of a couple rounds of breath work. They should be able to do this with a couple, minutes of meditation or whatever it might be, right? So the goal is to give people the tools, and then over time, they can use them more targeted and less often. And that's kind of, the goal for my clinical practice as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. So as we wrap up here, if we cycle back to methylene blue, if we have someone who is an athlete, what do you think is a dose before exercise? Probably about 2 hours before, dose maybe potentially after for recovery, and then explain I have another follow-up question about a different case on that, and then we'll talk about how the Transcriptions dosing is going to be a little bit different. But I think people in general are thinking dosing just in terms of milligrams, which is more where the research is from.
Yeah. So the dosing that I would mostly recommend people fall into the range somewhere between around 8 milligrams to about 25 milligrams per dose. And typically on the lower end of that scale is all you're going to need is what it comes down to. But that's the dosing range that I've mostly seen. What I often do for people, even athletes, even people that are doing it for the endurance edge side of things, is start off at a low dose, start at 4 milligrams, which is like a quarter of one of our troches called Just Blue. And you take that for about 3 days, see how you feel. Then after 3 days, increase it to additional quarter. So 8 milligrams, then 12, then 16. Like that's typically the range. I like people to do that. Even if you're starting it off for something you're not going to take every day, I still recommend taking it every day for that period of time. It doesn't stay in your system for, more than 24 hours by any means at these kinds of doses. It's way out of your system. The goal is just to get you a feeling on a daily basis of how you're feeling when you're taking it. And then when you get that feeling of how it makes you feel or how it helps you recover on the other end of things, if you're doing it on the recovery side, then that's your dose that you're going to use, whether you use it, periodically, or you use it, only on, days when you're traveling or whatever it might be. That's typically what I would recommend doing. That's your mitochondrial support dose. It doesn't become more anti-infective until you start getting around that milligram to 1.5 milligrams per kilogram dosage, 50 to 70 milligrams or so. And if you're going to be using those kinds of doses, I usually recommend working with a provider because it is more stressful on the system on those doses, and especially as you get higher than that. Because what we do, not only is it going to help you make energy and with the redox side of things, detox, but it's also going to help as an anti-infective because it makes more hydrogen peroxide in the system. Hydrogen peroxide, our cells use this as an anti-infective and as an anti-cancer to kill off cells that we don't need. But you have to have, if you're going to get more of that hydrogen peroxide in the system, you need to have the capacity to rev up, your antioxidant pathways like NRF2 and things like that to make your own glutathione, for example, to be able to neutralize that stress. And if you're already under a lot of stress, you may not be able to tolerate that very well. And so one of the ways that people get into trouble using methylene blue is by using too high of a dose too quickly. And the other way they get into trouble is by using dosing that's very difficult to understand, like liquids, for example. They come in droppers, and unfortunately with liquids, the potency is all over the board, typically about 50% less than what it says on the label. But then you're taking a number of drops per day, and then you tell me hey doc, I've been taking 10 drops a day and I feel terrible. I'm like, well, how many milligrams have you been taking? They're like, oh, I don't know. I'm just taking drops, right? You don't actually know what you're taking. And that's like one of my biggest pet peeves. I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. You're taking a liquid. You have no idea how much you're taking and you feel terrible. Don't take it anymore, right? Liquids also have a higher chance of degrading over time. They're messier. Methylene blues are very
stain the crap out of everything.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Word to the wise, even with our troches, making sure you're cutting them on dark surfaces, and then having buffered vitamin C at the house can scrub out almost anything if you get the blue on there. This has saved my marriage at least 3 times, I think now, Mike. Once in the laundry, which that wasn't a pretty picture. Once was in my sink as well. You have to realize when you're taking methylene blue, by the way, that your urine's going to turn blue as well.
Yep.
So if you have a hard time making it to the bathroom, that's another problem, right? The toilet itself will be fine. But again, surfaces you have to be aware of. So buffered vitamin C and avoiding liquids, in my estimation, is usually a good idea for the reasons I just mentioned. And keeping the dose low, like around, again, the average for most people, like most of the athletes that I work with that are using it either for recovery or performance are taking between 8 and 12 milligrams per dose. Not typically more than that, unless they're doing a lot of endurance work or a lot of
special cases.
A lot of high powered stuff. But on average, between 8 and 12 milligrams is what I've seen to be the most benefit.
Yeah. And it's a funny story about the toilets. A while ago, I was testing out some methylene blue and I had taken it in the morning and I actually just completely forgot that I had taken it for a few days. And I'm like, oh, my wife must be using some new toilet bowl cleaner. I don't know the toilet's being blue all the time. And it took me a while to go, oh, you dumbass, you took methylene blue. So it's not the toilet bowl cleaner. It's, your urine's a little bit blue colored.
Exactly. Yeah. So you can scrub out the toilet with buffered vitamin C will also work. So that's what I have in my house. That's what has saved my marriage. And I would recommend, doing it for your surfaces just in case. I mean, certainly traveling with liquid is just a nightmare.
Oh yeah.
We have these things called buccal troches, which are these dissolvable lozenges at Transcriptions, which you could dissolve in the mouth because they're buccal, but with methylene blue, we typically recommend just swallowing it because it's so highly bioavailable. It's one of the few compounds out there that the bioavailability is like between 70 and 90%.
Yeah.
But
ridiculously high.
Yeah. Which is very, very high compared to most compounds you're going to take orally. So we do have another product that has a combination of methylene blue, nicotine, caffeine, and CBD, and that's called blue cannatine. That one specifically, I do usually recommend in the mouth because it's not going to be that blue. It only has 5 milligrams of methylene blue in the total troche. And nicotine is very fast acting. So if you dissolve it in the mouth, you're going to feel within about 5 to 10 minutes. And that's great for productivity focus. People do use it as a pre-workout as well because of the nicotine in there and the caffeine. They're very low dose, just 1 milligram of nicotine and 50 milligrams, 50 of caffeine. It's a kind of quarter cup of coffee. And usually that's a full troche. People take a half of those doses. And it's a nice way to keep yourself more focused so you don't want to scroll on your Instagram feed while you're doing your workout, which is never good for performance, so.
Yeah. Awesome. And where can people find out more about Transcriptions and all the other products? I know you've got, products of the cordyceps and you've got all sorts of cool stuff there.
Transcriptions is the name of the company. Transcriptions.com is where you can find us. We have tons of blogs and education. That's kind of our big thing is that, again, we have our nonprofit organization as well. So we really care about educating and really making sure that we get as much good content out as possible. So our nonprofit's called Health Optimization Medicine and Practice, or Home Hope for short. You can check it out at homehope.org. If you're a practitioner, don't have to be licensed, you're looking for additional education, we would love you to come check it out and learn from us. We have a 7-module certification. The foundational module is metabolomics, actually, which I alluded to earlier. You could even just get certified to practice metabolomics if you don't want to take the rest. Because we do think that there's such a huge potential to add on metabolomics to clinical practice, or even an exercise performance center or whatever, right? As soon as you're measuring, vitamins, minerals, nutrients at this level, and then optimizing them to optimal ranges between 21 and 30, like it's a big deal. It's a very big deal. And we have an annual symposium every year as well. Actually, our next one's going to be in Chicago in October. I think it's October 2nd and 3rd at the Drake Hotel. And so we have that every year. We have a symposium where we get people together and we have speakers, we have continuing medical education credits and things like that. And then I guess the last thing would just be me. If you're interested in more of my stuff, you can find me. My website is my name, drscottscherr.com, DRSCOTTSHERR. I have my consulting there. Links to my companies. I also have a company called One Base Health that works in the hyperbaric space, integrated technology space as well. And then on the socials at Transcriptions, at Dr. Scott Sherr, at HomeHope.org, at One Base Health as well. So I know there's lots of places, but everybody has a different place they like to go these days. So
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. And I appreciate all the info. And I love all the educational stuff you guys put out too, which is nice to see companies that want their consumers to be educated and is not over the top of marketing and weirdo claims. Like they want to actually help people and they want to actually, provide education at the same time too, which is awesome to see. So highly recommend everybody check that out. And thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. This is great.
Thanks for having me, Mike. This has been great too. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to the Flex Diet Podcast. Huge thanks to Dr. Scott Sherr for sharing all of his wonderful information. Make sure to check out all of his great stuff. We'll put all of his links down below. And if you are interested in anything from Transcriptions, I highly recommend you check them out. I have a link down below, which is FYI an affiliate link, but I've been following those guys for quite some time and just been testing out their products and really enjoy them. I've got some of my clients testing them out right now too. So thanks again to Dr. Scott. I really appreciate it. And if you want more information from me, you can hop on to newsletter link down below. And coming up, I will be at the Sports Pharmacy Conference this coming weekend. As you're listening to this, as of Monday, April 6th or so. And if you're there, please come up and say hi. I'll be speaking also at the International Society of Sports Nutrition Conference in Florida, middle of June. So if you're at that one, please come up and say hello. As always, thank you so much for listening to the podcast. We really, really appreciate it. And we've got a great lineup of more guests coming up soon, so stay tuned for that. If you have time and can give us the thumbs up, the like, download, even leave us a review, all that stuff goes a long ways to helping with the podcast. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Talk to all of you next week.
This podcast is for informational purposes only. The podcast is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. You should not use the information on the podcast for diagnosing or treating a health problem or disease or prescribing any medication or other treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider before taking any medication or nutritional supplement, and with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this or any other podcast. Reliance on the podcast is solely at your own risk. Information provided on the podcast does not create a doctor-patient relationship between you and any of the health professionals affiliated with our podcast. Information and statements regarding dietary supplements are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to therein. If you think you have a medical problem, consult a licensed physician.
He something ran with his hearing aid. What's wrong? I can't hear with it. Oh, no wonder. It's too far away.
This podcast is for informational purposes only. The podcast is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. You should not use the information on the podcast for diagnosing or treating a health problem or disease or prescribing any medication or other treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider before taking any medication or nutritional supplement, and with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this or any other podcast. Reliance on the podcast is solely at your own risk. Information provided on the podcast does not create a doctor-patient relationship between you and any of the health professionals affiliated with our podcast. Information and statements regarding dietary supplements are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to therein. If you think you have a medical problem, consult a licensed physician.